Imagine boarding a plane, just like any other day, expecting a peaceful journey from one city to another. But suddenly, you find yourself in the middle of a public confrontation, where racism, arrogance, and humiliation rear their ugly heads. That's exactly what happened when a successful black businessman, James Parker, was confronted by a white woman, Susan Turner, who thought her prejudice would go unnoticed. In front of an entire plane of passengers, Susan unleashed a torrent of hateful insults, determined to tear James down simply because of the color of his skin. But here's the twist. While some passengers sat in silence, one brave individual hit record. And that decision, it exposed Susan in ways she could never have anticipated. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and life-changing moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It was a typical day at JFK Airport in New York when James Parker boarded his flight to Los Angeles. James, a successful black businessman, was accustomed to the routine of flights and business meetings. He settled into his economy class seat, pulled out his tablet, and began reviewing some notes for his next meeting. Everything seemed normal until he felt the piercing gaze of a white woman sitting a few rows ahead. Susan Turner. Unaware of what was about to unfold, James remained composed as she abruptly stood up. Her demeanor quickly caught everyone's attention, but nobody yet understood her true intentions. Susan began walking toward James, her arrogance palpable in every step. It was clear she was ready for a confrontation, but no one could anticipate why. As soon as she was close enough, she spat out the first insult. "I can't believe someone like you is sitting here. You should be somewhere else." The venom in her voice cut through the air, and while James maintained his calm exterior, he couldn't fully mask the discomfort. The other passengers, previously engrossed in their own activities, now shifted their attention to the unfolding scene. The sudden silence was as thick as Susan's words. As Susan continued her barrage of insults, James felt a wave of emotions building up inside. The sense of powerlessness mixed with anger, but he knew he had to stay in control. The courage he had shown throughout his business career was being tested here, in this unexpected confrontation. Susan wouldn't relent. "Do you think you belong here? Because you don't." Her words were laced with hate, as if she were determined to strip away his dignity. He took a deep breath, locking eyes with her for a few seconds, but chose silence. His heart, however, raced. It was an emotional and psychological battle. The other passengers began exchanging uncomfortable glances. Something was clearly wrong, and everyone could feel it. Susan's insults not only demeaned James but also brought forth a deeply ingrained racism that many preferred to ignore. But in that moment, no one dared to intervene. The atmosphere on the plane became heavy, dense, as if everyone was trapped in a limbo of silence and tension. A few passengers began murmuring among themselves, but still, no one took the step to stop Susan's verbal attack. James, on the other hand, was processing the situation internally, trying to hold on to his dignity amidst the humiliation. Among the passengers was a young man named Michael Rodriguez, who was attentively watching the situation. Sitting a few rows back, his heart sank at what he was witnessing. He knew something had to be done. Without hesitation, he discreetly took out his phone and started recording. Michael knew that what was happening needed to be documented. He couldn't just sit by in silence like the others. Recording this scene felt like the only way to give a voice to the injustice he was seeing, and he had faith that, somehow, this recording could trigger a much-needed change. He kept recording, capturing every detail. As Michael recorded, Susan showed no signs of stopping. "It's typical. You people always think you have the same rights as us." Her words echoed through the plane, and it felt like a punch to the gut for James. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about a system of prejudice that impacted countless others daily. His thoughts raced, But he remained silent, resisting the urge to respond. His belief that keeping calm was the best course of action kept him grounded. He knew there was something greater at stake, that his reaction in this moment would be crucial. A turning point was coming, though he didn't yet know how. Time seemed to stand still inside that plane. Every new insult from Susan felt more brutal than the last, and James sensed that his perseverance was being tested. While a few passengers finally began to show signs of indignation, still no one had acted. It was as though the courage to confront racism was missing from everyone in the cabin. And as difficult as it was, James stood firm, refusing to give in to her provocations. He knew that if he lost control, Susan's prejudice would be validated in the eyes of many. The emotional struggle was intense, but James's determination to not fall into the trap of hatred was even stronger. Each passing second seemed to intensify the situation. Susan, now visibly frustrated by James's silence, began gesturing more aggressively. "Why don't you respond? Are you scared?" Her provocation was clear, but James remained steadfast in his decision not to retaliate. His demeanor reflected more than just resistance. It was a display of resilience. He knew this moment wouldn't be forgotten, that Susan's words and his silence carried a weight that went beyond the confines of that flight. What James didn't know was that, with every word, Michael was capturing the scene that would soon change everything. The tension on the plane was almost unbearable. Susan grew more dissatisfied by the minute, while James maintained his calculated calm. The expressions on the passengers' faces were a mix of disbelief, while others simply turned away, avoiding getting involved. The truth was that, for many, the courage to confront racism wasn't there yet. But for Michael, recording this scene was the least he could do. He didn't yet know the impact his recording would have, but he felt the truth had to come out. And with his phone in hand, he continued to document James's humiliation, who, even in his silence, was demonstrating extraordinary strength. The flight crew, having until then remained uninvolved, started to recognize the severity of the situation. One of the flight attendants discreetly approached Susan, asking her to calm down and return to her seat. She, with a look of superiority, refused. "I won't sit down until he's gone," she said, pointing at James with disdain. The flight attendant, clearly uncomfortable, looked at James as if seeking a peaceful resolution. James, in turn, raised his hand slightly, indicating that he was fine and that no intervention was necessary. But what no one knew at that moment was that this situation was far from over. With Susan's refusal to follow the crew's instructions, the atmosphere inside the plane grew even more charged. The flight attendant backed off, clearly unsure of how to handle the escalating scene. Some passengers began to whisper among themselves, increasingly uncomfortable with Susan's behavior. Michael kept recording, while the air was thick with tension and anticipation. James, on the other hand, wondered how much longer this would last. All he wanted was to reach his destination in peace, but after everything that had been said, he knew this flight was far from ordinary. As the confrontation unfolded, Michael Rodriguez, sitting quietly a few rows behind, felt a sense of urgency bubbling up inside him. He had witnessed enough. He could no longer sit idly by, pretending that what was happening didn't matter. With determination, he discreetly pulled out his phone and began to record the altercation. He had no idea of the impact this recording would have, but deep down, he believed that it could bring about change. In moments like this, when courage and perseverance were tested, Michael knew that capturing the truth was sometimes the most powerful form of action. The phone in his hand felt heavier than usual as he pressed record. His heartbeat quickened, mirroring the tension in the cabin. Michael felt a wave of emotion, part anger, part helplessness, as he watched James being berated by Susan. The insults continued, and with each one, Michael's resolve grew stronger. He knew the world needed to see this. He didn't know James personally, But in that moment, he felt a connection to him. It was a connection rooted in the shared human experience of witnessing injustice and refusing to turn a blind eye. The recording, for Michael, was an act of compassion and hope. The insults flowed without hesitation from Susan's mouth, but James's calm silence only made her angrier. "Are you just going to sit there and take it?" she sneered, her face twisted with contempt. The other passengers seemed frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Michael, however, knew exactly what he needed to do. As he continued recording, he silently prayed that this footage would lead to something meaningful. In a world where injustice often goes unchecked, Michael's faith in the power of exposure drove him to continue. The moment was critical, and he was determined not to let it pass unnoticed. As the confrontation wore on, the murmurs among the passengers grew louder. Some were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, while others whispered to one another, debating whether they should intervene. But no one did. Michael glanced around briefly, wondering if anyone else was as outraged as he was. He wasn't just recording for himself. He was recording for all the people who were too afraid to speak up, for those who had been in similar situations and had no one to defend them. Michael's actions were driven by both courage and compassion. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The camera lens didn't blink. Every second of the altercation was captured with precision. James, still maintaining his composure, remained silent, though the humiliation was written across his face. Michael could see the pain behind James's eyes, even though he kept his emotions in check. That pain was a reflection of the struggles that countless others had faced before him. As the insults kept coming, Michael couldn't help but feel that something monumental was happening. It was more than just a recording. It was a revelation, a moment that would eventually spark a much-needed conversation about race, courage, and resilience. Michael's recording wasn't just about documenting Susan's actions. It was about bearing witness to James's strength. His ability to remain calm in the face of such blatant racism was both inspiring and heartbreaking. As Michael continued to film, he felt a deep sense of admiration for James's perseverance. "Why isn't anyone doing anything?" he thought, his frustration growing. But at the same time, he understood the hesitation. Fear often paralyzes, and in moments like this, the line between right and wrong can seem blurry for those who are watching from the sidelines. Michael, however, refused to be a bystander. As the recording continued, Michael's faith in humanity was tested. Could something good come from this moment of pain? Could the exposure of this injustice lead to real change? He didn't know for sure, but he believed it was possible. With every second that passed, the tension in the plane grew, and Michael's resolve only strengthened. This wasn't just about Susan and James. This was about something much bigger. It was about accountability, about showing the world the reality that many people face every day. Michael's hands were steady as he recorded, knowing that this moment would soon belong to the world. In the midst of the chaos, James remained calm, though his heart was undoubtedly racing. Michael's recording caught every subtle movement, every shift in the atmosphere. The situation was reaching a boiling point, and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. As Susan continued her tirade, James's silence seemed to fuel her anger. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she spat. But James didn't flinch. His dignity remained intact, even though Susan was doing everything she could to strip it away. Michael felt a deep sense of respect for James's restraint. The cabin was filled with tension, and it was clear that something had to give. As Michael continued to film, he wondered if the crew would finally intervene. The flight attendants had been largely silent, but the situation was becoming too volatile to ignore. Michael's camera captured everything: the escalating hostility, the quiet resilience of James, and the palpable discomfort of the passengers around them. "Will anyone step in?" Michael thought, his eyes darting between Susan and the crew. But no one moved. The recording kept rolling, a silent testimony to the power dynamics at play. As the minutes passed, Michael became more and more determined to make sure that this moment wouldn't be forgotten. He knew that sharing this footage could ignite a conversation that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. The tension between Susan and James was emblematic of a much larger issue, one that needed to be addressed head-on. Michael's faith in the potential for change drove him to keep recording, even as the scene became more uncomfortable. He knew that this wasn't just about what was happening on the plane. It was about shining a light on a deeper truth. Michael's phone continued recording, capturing the escalating tension with every passing second. As Susan's insults grew more personal, the expressions of the passengers around them shifted from confusion to disbelief. Yet, no one dared to step in. Michael's heart pounded as he documented the moment, knowing that what he was doing could have lasting consequences. This wasn't just about one woman's prejudice. It was about systemic racism, about courage, about standing up when no one else would. Michael wasn't sure how this would all end, but he was certain of one thing: the world needed to see this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the flight attendants approached Susan, her face etched with discomfort. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat," she said, her voice shaky. But Susan wasn't about to back down. "I'm not going anywhere until he's gone," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. Michael's phone was still recording, capturing every moment of the standoff. He knew that what happened next would be critical. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Michael held his breath, waiting to see how it would all unfold. He had faith that, one way or another, the truth would come to light. With his phone still recording, Michael watched as the situation continued to escalate. Susan refused to back down, and the flight attendant, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation, retreated. The atmosphere in the cabin was charged, and Michael knew that this was far from over. His hands remained steady as he filmed, knowing that this moment of confrontation and humiliation was about to become a turning point. What had started as a quiet act of recording was now evolving into something much bigger, a moment of revelation and courage, one that would soon be shared with the world. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, the atmosphere inside the cabin was still thick with the weight of the confrontation. Passengers began gathering their belongings, but the tension from the earlier incident lingered in the air. James Parker remained in his seat for a moment, collecting his thoughts. The flight may have ended, but he knew that the ordeal wasn't truly over. As he rose from his seat, his mind still buzzing with the sting of Susan's insults, he noticed Michael Rodriguez quietly slipping his phone into his pocket. The young man had captured everything, but neither knew how much that recording would change. Once they disembarked, Michael felt a surge of determination. As he stood in the busy terminal, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of travelers, he knew what he had to do. He quickly found a quiet spot and reviewed the footage on his phone. Every moment of the confrontation was there: the insults, the tension, the silence of the other passengers, and James's unwavering composure. Michael didn't hesitate. With a few taps, he uploaded the video to his social media accounts, adding a simple caption: "This is what racism looks like." He had no idea how quickly the video would spread, or the impact it would have. The video started gaining traction almost immediately. At first, it was shared by Michael's friends and followers, but soon, it began circulating beyond his immediate network. Comments poured in, people expressing shock, anger, and sadness over what they had just witnessed. "How could someone act like this in 2024? One user commented. Others demanded accountability for Susan's actions, calling for her to be identified and held responsible. Michael's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as the video went viral. It became clear that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. The truth was spreading, and fast. As the video reached thousands, then millions of viewers, it caught the attention of major media outlets. News organizations began covering the story, replaying the footage of Susan's tirade over and over again. Journalists reached out to Michael for interviews, wanting to know more about the incident. "Why did you decide to record it?" they asked him. Michael's response was simple but powerful, because someone needed to see it. The video became more than just a piece of footage. It became a symbol of the deep-seated issues of racism that still plagued society. The conversation had started, and there was no turning back. As the video continued to spread, people began digging into who Susan Turner was. The Internet, with its relentless ability to uncover hidden truths, didn't take long to find her. Within hours, Susan's identity was revealed, a senior manager at a prominent tech company. Her professional profile painted her as a successful, well-respected figure in the industry. But the video showed a different side of her, a side that shocked those who knew her professionally. Co-workers, friends, and even family members were taken aback by the footage. The woman they thought they knew was now being exposed to the world in a completely different light. The revelation of Susan's identity ignited a firestorm. People demanded that her employer take action. "How can someone with such hateful views hold a position of power?" one commenter asked, echoing the sentiments of many others. The pressure mounted, and soon Susan's company was forced to release a statement. They condemned her actions, stating that they were investigating the incident internally. But for many, this wasn't enough. The video had already sparked a national conversation, and the demand for accountability was growing louder by the hour. Susan's life, once carefully curated, was now unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, James Parker was coming to terms with what had happened. He had received messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had seen the video. Though he appreciated the outpouring of kindness, a part of him still wrestled with the pain of the encounter. He hadn't sought attention. He had simply wanted to get through a flight peacefully. But now, he found himself at the center of a much larger conversation about race and injustice in America. As the video continued to circulate, James began receiving invitations to speak about his experience. Reluctantly at first, he realized he had an opportunity to use this platform for something bigger. In interviews, James spoke with quiet strength. "This isn't just about one incident on a plane," he said during one televised appearance. "It's about the daily experiences of people who face racism and discrimination. It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to exist." His words resonated deeply with viewers. James wasn't just a victim of a public humiliation. He was a voice for countless others who had faced similar treatment in silence. His calm demeanor, combined with his willingness to speak out, made him a symbol of hope and resilience in a time of great division. The video had now taken on a life of its own, sparking debates on talk shows, social media, and even in political circles. Some questioned how someone like Susan could have hidden such blatant racism for so long. Others wondered why the passengers hadn't stepped in sooner. "It's easy to say you would have done something in that situation," one commentator noted, "but the reality is, fear often stops people from intervening." The conversation expanded beyond just Susan and James, touching on broader issues of bystander apathy and the courage it takes to confront injustice when it happens in real time. As days passed, the video's momentum didn't slow. Michael, who had uploaded the footage, found himself thrust into the public eye. He was interviewed on various platforms, often asked why he chose to record instead of directly intervening. "Recording was my way of intervening," he explained. "I knew that exposing the truth was the most powerful thing I could do in that moment." His words struck a chord with many, highlighting the idea that sometimes bearing witness and sharing the truth can be as powerful as stepping in physically. Michael's actions were being celebrated as a courageous act of perseverance in the face of injustice. With the video's widespread reach, it wasn't long before legal experts began weighing in. There's no question that Susan's behavior could have legal consequences, one lawyer commented during a news segment. She could face charges for hate speech or even a civil lawsuit. Others pointed out the potential consequences for her career, noting that companies are increasingly unwilling to tolerate employees who engage in racist behavior. The situation was escalating quickly, and it became clear that Susan would not escape the repercussions of her actions. The flight had ended, but the fallout was only beginning. As the truth about Susan's identity and behavior continued to unravel, people began calling for broader changes. The video had opened a wound, exposing how deeply racism was ingrained in everyday interactions. But it had also ignited a spark of hope that exposure and accountability could lead to real change. People from all walks of life were sharing the video, adding their own stories of facing discrimination. It was a moment of collective revelation, one that transcended the boundaries of that single flight. The truth had taken flight, and there was no stopping its course. As the video continued to spread like wildfire across social media, an intense public outcry began to take shape. People were no longer just angry at Susan's words, they were determined to uncover who she was. The Internet's relentless ability to dig up information went into overdrive. It wasn't long before online sleuths, armed with nothing but the video footage and a fierce sense of justice, began to piece together clues. Who is this woman? Became the question on everyone's mind, as social media users scoured every frame of the video, hoping to find something that could lead them to her identity. Within hours, Internet detectives had made progress. Small details from the video, like the brand of Susan's luggage, her clothes, and even the faint logo on her laptop bag, became crucial pieces of evidence. A few posts on discussion forums started suggesting that she might work in the tech industry. From there, it didn't take long for someone to connect the dots. A user on a popular social media platform shared what seemed to be a LinkedIn profile that matched Susan's description. Susan Turner, senior manager at a major tech company, the post read. And just like that, her professional life was no longer private. Once her identity was revealed, the backlash was immediate and intense. People flooded Susan's professional and personal social media accounts, leaving comments expressing their outrage. How can someone with such hateful views be in a leadership position? One person wrote. Others called for her to be fired, tagging her employer in the posts. The revelation of Susan's identity turned what had been a viral video into a full-blown national scandal. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Racist Tech Executive Exposed After In-Flight Confrontation." The public had not only identified her, they were demanding consequences. For many, the fact that Susan held a prominent role in a major tech company only made the situation worse. If this is how she treats people in public, how does she behave behind closed doors at work? Asked one commenter. Soon, stories began to emerge from people claiming to have worked with Susan. Some shared anecdotes about her condescending attitude in the office, while others suggested that her behavior in the video wasn't an isolated incident. As the public continued to dig deeper, it became clear that Susan's carefully curated professional image was crumbling. The Internet had turned its focus onto her life, and nothing was left untouched. As Susan's past was being unearthed, her employer faced mounting pressure to respond. The tech company, which prided itself on diversity and inclusion, was now caught in the middle of a public relations nightmare. In the age of social media, companies were held to higher standards, and silence was not an option. The company's social media team scrambled to put together a statement. Within 24 hours of Susan's identity being revealed, the company released an official statement condemning her behavior and promising a full internal investigation. But for many, this was not enough. The public wanted to see real consequences, not just words. While the company investigated, Susan's personal life began to unravel as well. People who knew her outside of work were shocked by what they had seen in the video. Old friends, neighbors, and even former classmates expressed disbelief at her behavior. "She always seemed so nice," one person commented on a local news website. Others, however, were less surprised. "I knew her in college," one former acquaintance wrote. "She always had this air of superiority about her. I'm not shocked to see her like this." The search for the real Susan had begun, and the picture that was emerging was far from flattering. As the public continued to expose more of Susan's past, the media also began to focus on her family background and upbringing. Articles were written about the environment in which she had grown up, and some speculated that her views were shaped by her privileged background. It wasn't long before old photos of Susan at exclusive country clubs and luxury events started circulating online. The narrative was becoming clear. Susan wasn't just an ordinary person who had made a mistake. She represented a deeper problem of entitlement and racism that many people felt needed to be addressed. The conversation was no longer just about her. It was about privilege and power. In the midst of the public backlash, Susan went silent. Her social media accounts were either deactivated or set to private. Reporters camped outside her home, hoping for a statement, but Susan refused to speak to anyone. Meanwhile, her employer faced continued calls to fire her. Petitions were circulating online, gathering thousands of signatures from people demanding action. "Susan Turner does not represent the values of a modern workplace," one petition read. "If her company truly believes in diversity and inclusion, they must remove her from her position." The pressure was mounting, and it seemed like only a matter of time before her company would have to make a decision. As the investigation into Susan's behavior continued, former colleagues began to come forward with more damning stories. Some spoke anonymously to the press, describing incidents where Susan had made inappropriate comments or treated employees unfairly. "She always acted like she was above everyone else," one former coworker said. "I'm not surprised that this finally came to light." These stories only fueled the public's anger. For many, it wasn't just about holding Susan accountable for her actions on the plane. It was about addressing a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. With each new revelation, the pressure on Susan and her employer intensified. News outlets continued to cover the story, and social media was ablaze with discussions about racism, privilege, and accountability. Some commentators pointed out that Susan's downfall was a result of the power of the internet and the vigilance of ordinary people who refused to let her actions go unnoticed. "This is what happens when people hold others accountable," one person tweeted. "We're tired of sweeping racism under the rug." The search for Susan's true identity had turned into a larger movement, one that was about exposing and confronting systemic issues of inequality. As the days passed, it became clear that Susan's career and reputation were hanging by a thread. The internet had turned her life upside down, and there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. But for many, this wasn't just about punishing Susan, it was about sending a message. The public had spoken, and they were no longer willing to tolerate hate, discrimination, or entitlement. Susan's story had become a symbol of a broader cultural shift, one that demanded accountability and justice for those who had been wronged. The search for her identity had revealed more than just her name. It had exposed the deep-seated issues that society needed to address. As the investigation into Susan Turner deepened, her carefully constructed life began to unravel. What had once seemed like a single public outburst of racism quickly snowballed into a full-scale exposé of her past. As news of her behavior on the plane spread, former colleagues, acquaintances, and even neighbors started coming forward with stories of their own. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. Susan had a long history of discriminatory behavior. The internet, relentless in its pursuit of truth, started pulling at the threads of her past, and each one revealed another layer of the person Susan had worked so hard to conceal. The first wave of revelations came from former coworkers. Many of them had stayed silent over the years, either out of fear or because they didn't feel their voices would be heard. But the viral nature of the video gave them the courage to speak out. This isn't the first time Susan's made racist comments, one anonymous source revealed to a local news outlet. She's always had this attitude of superiority, especially toward people of color. These accounts painted a picture of a woman who had used her position of power to belittle and undermine others, both in and out of the workplace. As more people came forward, the picture of Susan's true character became clearer. Old classmates from university reached out to media outlets, recounting incidents of casual racism and elitism. She always acted like she was better than everyone, one former classmate recalled. Back then, we didn't have the tools to call her out, but now, people are finally seeing who she really is. The floodgates had opened, and with every news story, Susan's reputation sank deeper. What was once a private matter, confined to those who knew her personally, had now become a national scandal that no amount of damage control could contain. Susan's professional life took a devastating hit as well. The tech company where she worked had no choice but to act in the face of mounting public pressure. After conducting a brief internal investigation, they issued a statement. Susan Turner had been terminated from her position as senior manager. The company emphasized its commitment to diversity and inclusion, but for many, this was too little, too late. The damage had been done. Susan's firing was seen as a necessary step, but it didn't erase the years of unchecked behavior that had gone unnoticed or ignored by her superiors. The revelation of her racism had sparked a conversation about the responsibilities companies have in vetting their leaders. While losing her job was a significant blow, it was only the beginning of Susan's downfall. The media continued to uncover more of her past, each revelation more damning than the last. An investigative journalist uncovered a report from a previous employer, where Susan had been involved in a discrimination lawsuit that had quietly settled out of court. This revelation only fueled the public's outrage. "She's been doing this for years," one commentator tweeted. "It's no wonder she's never been held accountable. People have been covering for her this whole time." Susan's history of prejudice and abuse of power was now out in the open, and the world was watching. As the secrets of Susan's professional life came to light, her personal life was also falling apart. Old friends distanced themselves, shocked by what they were learning. Some tried to defend her at first, claiming that she had always been a kind and generous person, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. "I can't believe this is the same person I knew," one former friend commented online. "But after seeing all the stories, I have to admit, maybe I never really knew her at all." Susan's once tight social circle began to crumble, leaving her increasingly isolated as more people turned their backs on her. Even Susan's family wasn't immune to the fallout. Some of her relatives were dragged into the scandal, with reporters digging into their lives as well. Old family photos from exclusive gatherings and private clubs surfaced, painting a picture of privilege and entitlement that seemed to run deep. While some family members defended Susan, others distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the public disgrace she had become. The exposure of her racist behavior had not only cost her job and her friendships, but it had also strained her family relationships, leaving her more isolated than ever. The legal consequences of Susan's actions were also becoming a possibility. Several civil rights groups took notice of the incident and began exploring the option of filing lawsuits. Some of these groups argued that Susan's behavior wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was illegal. There are laws in place to protect people from hate speech and racial harassment, one lawyer stated on a popular news segment. "We're looking into whether Susan Turner violated those laws, and if so, she could face serious legal consequences." The idea that Susan could face lawsuits added yet another layer to the already complex fallout of her actions. Meanwhile, the public continued to demand justice. Online petitions were created, calling for more severe consequences for Susan's behavior, and the hashtags #HoldSusanAccountable and #JusticeForJames were trending on social media. People wanted more than just an apology, they wanted systemic change. For many, Susan's story was emblematic of a much larger issue. It wasn't just about one woman's racist outburst, it was about the pervasive racism that still existed in many parts of society. The exposure of Susan's actions had sparked a larger movement, one that was determined to see real change in how racism was confronted and dealt with. As the days passed, Susan's once promising future seemed to dissolve before her eyes. She had been removed from boards, blacklisted from potential job opportunities, and had become a social pariah. What began as a confrontation on an airplane had now evolved into a full-blown public reckoning, and there was no escaping it. Susan had built her life on a foundation of privilege and entitlement, but now that foundation was crumbling. Her secrets were out, her reputation was in tatters, and there was no going back to the life she once knew. The consequences of her actions were far-reaching and irreversible. For Susan, this was a fall from grace unlike any other. She had been exposed for who she truly was, and the world had responded with a resounding rejection of her behavior. Her story had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one is immune from accountability in the age of social media and public scrutiny. Susan's actions had set off a chain reaction, one that revealed not just her own prejudice, but the ways in which society enables people like her to rise to power without ever being held accountable. The secrets she had kept for so long were finally exposed, and there was no way to hide from the truth anymore. While the world was fixated on the downfall of Susan Turner, James Parker's life was taking a different turn. After the video of the airplane confrontation went viral, James found himself at the center of a national conversation about racism, courage, and resilience. But James wasn't looking for attention. He had never sought to be a symbol of anything. He was just a man trying to live his life in peace. Yet, as the days passed and the media frenzy intensified, James began to realize that this moment was bigger than him. His journey was just beginning, and the world was watching. In the days following the viral incident, James was bombarded with messages of support from people all over the world. Strangers reached out to thank him for his calm and dignified response to Susan's insults. "You inspired me with your strength," one message read. Another said, "I've faced racism my whole life, but seeing how you handled it gave me hope." These words touched James deeply. He hadn't felt particularly strong during the confrontation. He had simply done what he thought was right. But now, he realized that his silence had spoken louder than any words could have. As more media outlets reached out for interviews, James was initially hesitant. He wasn't comfortable with the spotlight, and the idea of reliving the humiliation he had endured on that plane was far from appealing. But after some reflection, James decided that this was an opportunity to share his story, not just for himself, but for others who had been silenced by racism. When he finally agreed to speak publicly, his message was clear. This isn't just about one incident on a plane. This is about a lifetime of experiences, about the daily challenges that people of color face in a society that still struggles with equality. James's first major interview was on a popular morning news show, and it became a defining moment. The host asked him what it was like to sit there, listening to Susan's hateful words, and James took a deep breath before responding. "It was painful," he admitted, "but what hurt more was the silence of the people around me. I wasn't just facing Susan, I was facing a system that allowed her to feel justified in treating me that way." His words resonated deeply with viewers, and social media exploded with praise for his bravery and grace. James had become a symbol of resilience, but for him, this was about more than just his own experience. As invitations to speak at events and on other shows poured in, James realized that his story had the power to inspire real change. He started accepting more invitations, using each platform to speak about the importance of perseverance, hope, and love in the face of adversity. "We have to have faith," he said during one televised interview. Faith that things can get better, that people can change. But we also need courage. The courage to stand up and say that racism and discrimination will not be tolerated. His message was one of compassion, but it was also one of action. He urged people not to remain silent in the face of injustice. James's words touched hearts across the nation, but they also sparked conversations about the role of bystanders in situations of discrimination. "What would you have wanted the other passengers to do?" one interviewer asked him. James thought for a moment before replying, "I would have wanted them to speak up. Not for me, but for what was right." He didn't blame them for their silence, but he saw it as a reflection of a larger issue, the fear many people have of confronting uncomfortable truths. "It's not easy to step in," he acknowledged, "but silence can sometimes be as damaging as the words themselves." As his public profile grew, James became a sought-after speaker on the topics of racism, perseverance, and leadership. He began working with organizations focused on racial equality, sharing his story as a way to inspire others to take action. "My journey isn't unique," he would often say during his speeches. "There are millions of people facing the same struggles I've faced. The difference is, my story was captured on video. But this isn't just my story, it's our story." James's ability to connect his personal experience to the broader issues of systemic racism made him a powerful voice for change. James's journey wasn't without its challenges. While many people celebrated his resilience, others questioned his approach. Some critics suggested that by not responding more aggressively to Susan's insults, James had missed an opportunity to push back against racism more forcefully. But James disagreed. "There are different ways to fight," he explained in an interview with a prominent newspaper. "For me, the fight wasn't about shouting or retaliating. It was about showing that dignity and strength can overcome hate. We all have different roles to play in this struggle, and mine was to demonstrate that staying calm doesn't mean being weak." As James's message continued to spread, he became a mentor to young people who were grappling with their own experiences of discrimination. He would often tell them, "Your strength lies in how you choose to respond. Don't let someone else's hate define your worth." He encouraged them to persevere, to find hope in their darkest moments, and to have faith in their ability to overcome adversity. His words were a lifeline for many, especially those who had felt powerless in the face of racism. James's calm demeanor and unwavering belief in the power of love and understanding made him a beacon of hope for those looking for guidance. Through his journey, James found that sharing his story wasn't just about helping others, it was also about healing himself. Talking about the pain he had endured, and the resilience it had taken to overcome it, allowed him to process what had happened. "Every time I tell my story, I feel a little lighter," he confided in a close friend. "It's like I'm taking back some of the power that was stolen from me that day on the plane." James's willingness to be vulnerable, to share his emotional and psychological journey, made him not just a symbol of resilience, but a source of inspiration for those who had been hurt by similar experiences. As James reflected on the events that had unfolded, he remained hopeful for the future. He knew that change wouldn't come overnight, but he believed that each conversation, each story shared, was a step in the right direction. "It's not about being perfect," he would often say. "It's about trying, every day, to be better, to be kinder, to be more aware of the struggles others are facing." His journey had become a testament to the power of perseverance and hope, and for those who had followed his story, it was a reminder that even in the face of hate, love and compassion could prevail. As the story continued to unfold, it became clear that what had started as a single incident on an airplane had now blossomed into a larger societal reckoning. The confrontation between Susan Turner and James Parker had sparked a national conversation about racism, privilege, and the consequences of unchecked prejudice. The video recorded by Michael Rodriguez had become a symbol of something far greater than anyone had initially expected. It represented the power of truth, the importance of courage, and the necessity for change. But while the story captivated the public, it was the aftermath that would have the most lasting impact. In the days and weeks following Susan's public disgrace, conversations about her actions and their deeper implications continued to dominate news cycles and social media. Her fall from grace had become a cautionary tale for those in positions of power who had allowed their privilege to shield them from accountability. People from all walks of life began discussing how they, too, could be part of the solution, whether by confronting their own biases or by calling out discrimination when they saw it. Susan's downfall was a stark reminder that no one is immune from the consequences of their actions, no matter how high they sit in the social or professional hierarchy. As for James, he found himself reflecting on the profound changes that had come as a result of that fateful flight. He had become a symbol of resilience and hope, but for him, the real victory was seeing how his story had ignited a movement. The conversations he had sparked weren't just about him. They were about a society that was finally beginning to confront its deeply ingrained prejudices. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said in one of his many interviews. "But we're starting to have the conversations that we should have had a long time ago." His words resonated with many, as they saw the need for introspection and growth. The legal consequences for Susan were still unfolding. Civil rights organizations had begun investigating the possibility of taking legal action against her, not just for the incident on the plane, but for the pattern of behavior that had come to light in the aftermath. "This isn't just about one moment of racism," a representative from one organization said in a statement. "This is about holding people accountable for their actions and making it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." The conversation had shifted from a singular event to a broader discussion about accountability in both public and private spaces. In a surprising turn of events, Susan reached out through her legal team to issue an apology to James. "I deeply regret my actions and the pain I caused," her statement read. "I realize now how wrong I was, and I want to apologize to Mr. Parker and to anyone who was hurt by my words." The apology was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a necessary step toward healing, while others dismissed it as too little, too late. For many, the damage had already been done. "An apology doesn't erase years of prejudice," one commenter wrote. "It's time for real change, not just empty words." James, ever calm and composed, responded to Susan's apology with grace. "I accept her apology," he said during an interview. "But an apology is just the beginning. True change comes from actions, not words." I hope that Susan, and others like her, can take this moment to reflect on their behavior and commit to being better. His response was a testament to his belief in the power of forgiveness, but also a reminder that forgiveness alone wasn't enough. It was a call to action, a challenge to those who had witnessed the events to go beyond words and make meaningful changes in their lives. As the dust settled, the impact of the incident was still being felt. James continued to use his platform to advocate for racial equality, while Michael Rodriguez, the young man who had recorded the video, became a voice for the importance of speaking out against injustice. "I never imagined that one video could have this kind of impact," Michael said in an interview. "But it goes to show that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. Sometimes it's as simple as refusing to stay silent when we see something wrong." His words struck a chord with many, inspiring others to take action in their own lives. The video that Michael had posted, which had sparked the entire movement, was now being used as an educational tool. Schools, organizations, and even workplaces began showing the video during diversity and inclusion trainings, using it as an example of how everyday racism can manifest and how bystanders can make a difference. It was no longer just a piece of footage. It was a symbol of the ongoing fight for justice. "This video is a reminder that we all have a responsibility," said one diversity consultant. "Whether we're the victim, the perpetrator, or a witness, we each have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world." As for Susan, her life would never be the same. Her public apology, her loss of employment, and the revelations about her past had left her isolated and disgraced. The consequences of her actions were far-reaching, and it was clear that her path to redemption, if it existed, would be long and difficult. But for many, the focus had shifted away from her and toward the larger issues her behavior had highlighted. "This isn't just about Susan," James had said in one of his final interviews on the subject. "It's about changing the culture that allows people like her to feel justified in their actions. It's about creating a world where racism isn't tolerated, not just on airplanes, but everywhere." The video and its aftermath had become a turning point for many, serving as a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and change. For James, the most important takeaway wasn't the attention or the fame, it was the opportunity to use his experience to make a difference. "We have a long way to go," he often said, "but this is a start. And I'm hopeful. Because change is happening, even if it's slow." His journey, from humiliation to empowerment, had become a beacon of hope for countless others. The world had been shaken by the incident, but in its wake, there was a newfound sense of purpose, a belief that change was not only possible but inevitable. Now that you've seen the whole story unfold, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you be the one who stands up when injustice happens? Will you have the courage to speak out or, like Michael, record the truth when no one else does? We can no longer afford to be silent bystanders in a world that still tolerates racism, prejudice, and discrimination. The reality is, it's on each of us to make the change we want to see. What if, the next time you witness something unjust, you're the one who makes the difference? Think about the power of that one video. It wasn't just about exposing Susan, it was about showing that silence is no longer an option. We all have a voice, and it's time to use it. So, here's my challenge for you. How will you confront the issues of our time? How will you become part of the solution instead of standing on the sidelines? Leave a comment below about what you would have done in this situation, and let's start a conversation about how we can all do better. And if you want to keep learning and growing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future content. We're just getting started on this journey of understanding, justice, and real change. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's coming next.